My name is Gladys Perez Mualem. I am the coordinator of Women's Learning Group, a program created by Rabbi Shahar Orestein 11 years ago. I am very attached to Israel. I lived there 18 years, completed my studies, got married, and my 2 children were born in Israel. It is a great honor for us today to have the Consul General of Israel, David Levy, our speaker for the second time. He will talk to us about COVID-19 and its effects on Israel.
Amen.
We all have Israel at heart, politically, economically, and emotionally. We wish with all our heart that Israel will overcome this problem and lead the world with a special vaccine that saves Israel and the whole world. I would like to invite Lizette Shashua to read for us a brief biography of the Honorable Consul David Levy of Israel. בבקשה, ליזט, בכבוד.
Toda. Hello, Mr. David Levy. David Levy is Consul General of Israel for Quebec and the Atlantic provinces and permanent representative of Israel to the International Civil Aviation Organization since February 2018. A first-generation Israeli, Mr. Levy grew up in the city of Rehovot. At the age of 18, he volunteered to the Israeli Air Force, IAF, rescue and medical evacuation. His academic background is in law and political science and diplomacy and security. Magna cum laude, both from Tel Aviv University. He joined the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2002, and since then, his diplomatic career has taken him in Yaoundé, Cameroon, 2003 to 2005, Riga, Latvia, 2005 to 2009, and Seoul, South Korea, 2012 to 2016, where he served as deputy head of mission. More recently, he served as political counselor at the United Nations and international organizations' human rights departments. Mr. Levy is married to Maya and a proud father of 4 children. Mazal tov. Kol hakavod. Thank you. Please, Mr. Levy.
Thank you, Lizette, for the beautiful introduction. I would like to invite our wonderful cantor, Daniel Ben Lolo, to welcome our Honorable Consul, David Levy.
Mr. Levy,
Thank you.
Toda. Thank you very much, Gladys, and the Women's Learning Group is always exciting to be part of this wonderful group. I am privileged and honored to be able to sing a song for not only our Consul General here in Montreal, representative, and also a very good friend to the Jewish community and to myself personally. So I would like to sing a song that when we greet great Nesi'im, when we greet God into our sanctuary during the Hallel, there's a beautiful song called Baruch Haba. And we also greet that song when we have somebody special that comes into our lives and brightens up our life. And I'd like to sing this song for you. So as an introduction, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai berachnuchem mi bet Adonai Baruch haba b'shem Adonai berachnuchem מבית אדוני אל אדוני ויער לנו יסרו חג באבותים עד קרנות המזבח אלי אתה ועודך אלוהי ירוממך הודו לאדוני כי טוב כי לעולם חסדו הודו לאדוני כי טוב כי לעולם חסדו. ברוך הבא הנשיא הנכבד.
Thank you very much, Danny Ben Lolo. You did a great job. You make us very touched with your beautiful sound.
Thank you, Gladys. Thank you.
I would like to invite our precious, honorable Consul of Israel, Consul General David Levy. Bevakasha Berchabod, our wonderful consul.
Boker Tov, Toda Rabba, merci beaucoup tout le monde. Cantor Belulu is a very tough act to follow. I will do my best. Lisette, thank you very much for this very kind introduction. And of course, Gladys, thank you so much for inviting me. It's always great to meet you, to see you. I prefer to do it in person. But unfortunately, because of COVID, we have to settle for Zoom. I came to see you at the Spanish for Rosh Hashanah. Cantor Ben Lulu, please correct me. I think it was the Rabbi Pinto, you and me, and that's it. But I salute you. I salute everybody because you have to stay safe, and that is Pikuach Nefesh. And I'm looking for the opportunity to meet you in person. I want to start by talking a little bit about Israel before Corona. I don't know if you remember life before Corona, maybe to give us a little bit of perspective. Okay, going back to 2019, you know, Israel, the economy of Israel was performing very well, very stable growth, very low unemployment, growth in export, growth in import, growth in investment. Again, performing very well with, of course, the high-tech sector, like the locomotive that's pulling all the train forward. Not all sectors in the Israeli economy are as competitive, as productive as the high-tech sector. But again, things were in a very positive trend. As far as international relations, you know, enjoying a very, very solid support from the US, recognition of the Golan Heights, opening the embassy of the US in Jerusalem, very solid peace relations with Egypt, very solid peace relations with Jordan. So quiet borders, I would say. Of course, there are still tensions in the north. I will talk about it later. There were, at least with Iranian influence in Lebanon, Iranian influence in Syria. Of course, Iran being still the #1 strategic threat to the security of Israel because of its support of terrorists, because of its long-range missile, because of its project to put precision-guided missiles in Lebanon, and of course because its nuclear program that they're trying to hide from the world. So this is if you look at Israel politics, I remind you that in 2019 we had 2 elections. We had one in April, which was somewhat indecisive, and unlike Canada, we don't have the first past the post. We need a majority coalition. So after several attempts, there was a second attempt. Surprise, surprise, the result was not dramatically different. and still the result was indecisive. So we entered the year 2020, and we entered the COVID crisis with political instability. And I think that the only good thing we can say about COVID in Israel, that it was the glue or the incentive that enabled the creation of a majority government in Israel. Now, it's a very big government. Many people say it's too big. A lot of criticism about this government, but at least we could avoid going into a general election again under the pandemic. And I can tell you that at least from the point of view of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we have a full-time minister, we have a budget, and we are very active. And of course, you are witnessing very dramatic changes in Israel foreign relations in the last few weeks. I will talk about it a little bit later. So going back to the beginning of 2020, we were all very much aware of what's going on in China. Okay, we have very strong commercial relations with China. We have an embassy, we have consulates. We started sending families of diplomats who are stationed in China to Israel because there were shutdowns China. And we were very quick to react when we realized that the virus is spreading. First, it was closing the flights from several Asian countries where the pandemic started, you know, from China, from Korea, from Singapore. And in early March, there were really a handful of cases in Israel. By mid-March, we also closed the flights from European countries where there was an eruption. But very soon, we had to shut down Israel completely. In retrospect, I think we made a mistake that we didn't close the flights from the US and Canada sooner, because we know that 90% of the COVID cases that came into Israel did not come from Asia. They came from the US. But we were too slow to react and close the border, to close the flights from the US. But Israel was closed, and it remains closed for non-citizens. Just like Canada, there were very impressive operations to bring back Israeli nationals who were stranded all over the world. For the first time in history, there was a direct flight from Australia to Israel, direct flight from Peru to Israel, bringing back Israelis home because there were no more flights. And also many, by the way, took the connection via Toronto. It was one of the options to return home. So I think that the fact that Israel is a small country was an advantage in the first wave. You know, with one major international airport, you can put, and without de facto land crossings to our neighboring countries. So it was relatively easy to shut down, to create our own bubble, relatively easy to monitor. And I think that in the beginning, you could really see what we call Israel Hayafa, or Kol Israel Arevim Ze Laze. Very high level of compliance, and everybody stepping up to the plate to help. When I say everybody, I mean universities, you know, dropping everything, professors transforming their laboratories to corona-related research and corona-related work. Of course, the army, Tzahal, you know, allocating resources to support even the Shabak, you know, contact tracing technology. Even the Mossad, the intelligence agency, was recruited to head the effort to get medical equipment, you know, ventilators and protection equipment. Everybody chipped into the effort, and the first wave was relatively speaking successful. And when I speak about them, everybody stepping up to the plate, even military defense industry, on top of their usual work, they put together teams to do research and development, to develop new technologies which are COVID related. So, really everybody chipped in and everybody complied with the regulations, and Israel passed the first wave very successfully. Perhaps in retrospect, we reopened too fast and too broadly, sending kids back to school, opening things. That created a second wave of infection that reached its peak about a month ago. If we go deeper into the numbers, so we see, for example, that the first wave hardly didn't affect the Arab population. So there was like a misconception that this virus has nothing to do with Israeli Arabs. That's why in the summer, when there were many festivities, weddings, gatherings, we saw a spike within the Arab population. So there was also the issue of Haredim. Okay, so when they're out of the yeshiva, when they're not the yeshiva, there was not so much infection. But when they're back when there were Jewish holidays and back in school, we saw a very high rate of infections within the Haredi population. And on top of that, of course, I'm sure you're all following, there is also the issue of demonstrations. Look, I invite everybody to put on mute. There's also the issue of demonstrations, which some people accuse that it is also a source of infection. So all these are things that are happening until we find ourselves a month ago in a very high rate of infection, which forced a second shutdown. And only yesterday we started to reopen. But this time it's very similar to the model, very gradual. There is a division between red zones and green zones. They're starting the education system very gradually, only with the very young kindergarten, and they're going to do it much, much slower this time. There have been some challenges along the way, which I think led to the second wave, to the numbers that we saw a month ago. For example, the issue of personal example of leadership. Okay, it's if the government decides on a certain limitation, and then the prime minister invites his son for Pesach, and the president invites his daughter, for Pesach, even though it's not, and the head of Shabak is meeting his family for Sukkot, and the minister Gamliel is going to synagogue on Yom Kippur, even though the government voted against it, and other politicians. So, and this is all out in the open, so it's very, very difficult to convince the general public to comply. Okay, Haredim, there's a very big problem of compliance, not only in Israel, also in New York, even here in Montreal, there are some communities which are not as obedient, as cooperative, which requires more explanation, more enforcement. So these are some of the reasons that brought us to this second wave. Of course, certain businesses are protesting. Okay, why can't we open our place of business if we practice all the safety, etc.? So these are all things that contributed to the second wave that we're experiencing. Israel has been closed, except for Israeli citizens, and there was a list of exceptions. Okay, humanitarian exceptions, you know, if there's a funeral, or if it's simcha, you know, if there's a chatuna, a wedding, or a bris, or a bar mitzvah. Sometimes if it's a, you know, spouse, which is Israeli with a non-Israeli, so we allow. But generally speaking, Israel was closed, and I have to tell you that personally, for me, the fact that I have to refuse requests of Montreal Jews who want to go to Israel, who want to visit their homeland, who want to visit their family, their friends, and they cannot. It's a very difficult thing to do. It's a very painful moment in the history of the relations between the state of Israel and the diaspora. The fact that Israel is closed. Of course, it's pikuach nefesh, and everybody understands that. But this is, I would even say, a traumatic moment that Jews cannot travel to Israel. And I'm looking forward to removal of these restrictions, and that we could visit each other and travel freely. The restrictions have been changing almost on a daily basis. There was a few weeks ago approval for students, okay, to come to study in Israel, for yeshiva bucher, you know, to go to study in Israel. And the last development was for business people. So if business people can show justification for you know, work-related visit, then also they are given permission. So I think that, and of course, Canada is considered by us a green country. I know that COVID in Canada is very different from one place to another, and the Atlantic bubble is not like Montreal, and it's not like BC. At least as far as Israel is concerned, Canada is one green country. That means that people who come from Canada to Israel are not required to quarantine. So this is the situation. And gradually the Israeli restrictions are changing, are lifted. And I hope that soon, you know, more people from Canada will be able to, definitely from the Montreal Jewish community, will be able to travel to Israel. I'll just zoom out a little bit from Israel. You know, in our region, in the last couple of months, very dramatic developments with the Abraham Accords. The United Arab Emirates, together with Bahrain, established full diplomatic relations with Israel. This is a dramatic change in the region. Tremendous potential, economic, security, tourism. You know, it's really hard to imagine how this can affect us. And I would say one more point. In a couple of weeks, we have, of course, the presidential elections in south of the border here in the US, including quite a few seats in the Senate, about the 35 seats in the Senate, and of course the Congress. The US is and always will be the most important strategic ally of the state of Israel, and it doesn't matter who is in the White House, who is in control of the House or the Senate. For us, it's crucial to keep Israel as a non-partisan issue, to keep it, bipartisan support of Israel and the strategic alliance with Israel. This has become quite a challenge in recent years, both because of elements in the radical left, okay, young members of Congress in the Democratic Party who don't necessarily see eye to eye with the old guard in the Democratic Party as far as the relations with Israel. So if you want, you can definitely see Vice President Biden and Senator Harris as, mainstream Democratic Party as far as it comes to Israel, as opposed to Congresswoman AOC and Leib and others. But there's also a challenge from the right, from the rise of the old extremists, those who are racist, and they have some, issues with Jews. So we see these challenges both in both sides of the aisle, and of course it's very important for us to keep all channels open with whoever is in power and whoever is in opposition, and keep Israel as a non-partisan issue in U.S. Politics. According to the polls, and there's no substantial change. Usually American Jews vote 70% Democrat, 30% Republican. This is plus minus a few to each side. This is every elections, and this is probably what we're going to see in 2 weeks again. So I think I will stop now. I will just say that the Consulate of Israel has been open every day since the beginning of the pandemic. We never closed down. We are very careful, when it comes to hygiene, when it comes to mask. We work in shifts, so not everybody together at the same time, so we don't infect each other, so we don't have to close down because of quarantine. There were some places in the world where embassies had to close down because everybody had to go into quarantine. Fortunately, not here in Montreal, not in Canada. And I'm really looking forward to the time when we can meet each other in person, that we can celebrate in person, and we can work together and not through Zoom. So I think I will stop now and allow questions. I promise to answer every question. I'm not a politician, I'm not going to answer something else. I'm going to answer the question. So please. I don't know if maybe through the chat you want to send it in writing, or maybe through Lisette, you want to moderate, however you feel.
A correction.
I'd like to just send a warm hello from us here in the diaspora to you, Consul General, and just tell you that we, along with the eyes of the whole world, whether some of the people of the world want to admit it or not, we're all looking towards Israel to lead, and you are leading. There was some news about a test that's very rapid, that's going to come out soon. There's also news about vaccines. Do you know anything about those developments and where they are at?
So there are some very interesting technologies coming out of Israel in the context of COVID. I'm talking about testing technology, very rapid technology, and we're talking about treatments, how to treat the people in a more effective way, and also about contact tracing. Okay, very interesting technology. By the way, I want to say that all over the Western world, people don't want to download the government app. Because in the Western world, we don't mind giving our location to some commercial app like Facebook, no problem. But to give the government, we are all suspicious. And so this is why the government apps for contact tracing are not very successful anywhere in the West. However, if an organization, a company, instructs all its members, all its employees, to download an app, which is the commercial version of the app, then we can get a very high rate of participation in the app when it makes it more effective. So but that's just in brackets. I know that there are a few teams in Israel who are working on vaccine. There is the Biological Institute in Ness Ziona, which is a government Ministry of Defense institute. There are university teams, Ben Gurion, Tel Aviv, they're all working very advanced on vaccines. But these are very long processes. I think that only now they are starting the clinical trials. And this is something that's going to take a long time. Other teams in the world are also very advanced. And we are also looking at what other teams in the world are doing. For example, a few weeks ago, I coordinated a meeting between the Israeli Ministry of Health and the Quebec company called Medicago. They're outside of Quebec City, who is also doing very interesting research on developing a vaccine. Because eventually Israel is also interested in purchasing a successful vaccine once it's out there. So at the end of the day, I think that even if one of these teams over the world in Israel will manage to complete the clinical trials and have a vaccine ready, the time it would take to manufacture so many doses and to distribute it to so many people, we're going to have COVID around for a long time, and we need to learn how to live with it.
Yeah. How does Israel look at hydrochloroquine?
Well, that question is above my payroll, my paycheck. I can tell you, but we learned a lot from the first wave. We learned a lot from how to treat people, so I think that now the medical teams are much better equipped and better trained, but still, at the end of the day, it really depends on us, on how we comply with the regulations.
I know there's other questions, but I just want to put one remark. I really felt for Israel when this happened, because the fact that it came from China, and there are so many close ties with agriculture, with industry, with China, that you're in a very delicate tightrope dance. So God bless you, and God give you the wisdom to do the right thing, which you are.
Amen.
Thank you very much. This is a challenge. This is a challenge that many Western countries are facing. I think we all learned that we cannot put all our eggs in one basket, in the sense that we can't rely on one supplier, be it China, which was the main manufacturing hub of the world. We all found ourselves in shortage of protective gear and ventilators, and so I think that world supply chain will be a little different when we come out of COVID, and countries will maintain a certain ability to produce at home things that in the past they would import, and even if it's a little bit more expensive, because they don't want to risk being dependent on a single supplier, a single producer, in the sense that China was the major player. So I think we're going to see some effects on that. But other than that, of course, I served 4 years in Korea. I've seen with my own eyes the amazing economic growth of Northeast Asia. And with all due respect to Europe and even to North America, I advise you all to turn your look towards that part of the world, because what's happening there is so fast and so amazing that we all need to turn our attention to that part of the world. I think that the history of the 21st century is going to be written in that, China, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, the major things are happening there right now that are going to affect all our lives.
Like what? Like what?
Again,
Evelyn Shaheen, you have a question,
No,
I think.
he said that what part of the world, it's going so fast. For example,
almost all the technology that you and I are consuming is developed and produced over there. And if up until now, they took what was developed in the West and just manufactured it with cheap labor, and now they're doing their own R&D, they're doing their own innovation, and they invested a lot in education in the past generation. They're changing their mindset, and they're starting to break with new technologies that we're not familiar with. They're going to bypass us, the West, very rapidly, and it's going to be very dramatic to see this happen, how they become the most advanced countries, the most advanced cities, the most technological, the most productive, the most efficient, because they're adapting to things that we will need to play catch up with them, not the other way around. But let's not change this discussion about Asia.
thank you.
Okay, I would like to ask, please.
Yes.
I would like to ask, I hear sometimes the speakers from Tel Aviv University, and in one of the speeches, I heard one of the researchers of Israel talking about research in the UAE, United Arab Emirates, that he was always, before there were the contact with them, he was always looking forward for their own research, and he always wished that we can do it together with them. Can we explain anything? Are they really advanced in their research there? Like it looks like.
I strongly recommend you to look at the Emirates and as Bahrain as very exceptional countries in the Middle East. They are very rich countries. They are very highly educated people, very well connected. They have very strong universities, very strong research. They even have space capabilities, nuclear capabilities. These are very advanced countries. They are not poor countries. In this respect, it's very different than the peace we have with Egypt and with Jordan, where the population is very poor. These are very rich countries. When they come to Israel, they come for security, because they know that the risk, the number one risk for them is Iran. They come for us for security cooperation, for strategic partnership. They come for us for future technologies because they understand that in the long term, their sources of income, which is basically petrol, gas, oil and gas, are not sustainable. So they're looking for future growth engines, and they see Israel as a potential partner. They come to Israel for trade because Israel has access to the Mediterranean. So goods can travel through Israel to Europe and vice versa, from Israel to the Emirates and to Bahrain, to the markets of Asia. The airport in Dubai is one of the biggest in the world. The seaport in the Emirates is one of the biggest in the world. So really, this peace agreement with Bahrain and Emirates is a huge game changer in the region. I just saw in the chat a few questions, one about Olim Chadashim and one about Sai Barikat. So yes, throughout the pandemic, Israel did allow Aliyah. It was a little bit more difficult for Olim North America to prepare all the necessary documents because they need to prepare a file for Nefesh B'Nefesh, and then the Sochnut approves it, and then they get the Olim the visa. So I can tell you that there were some difficulties for people to get because the local government agencies that provide these documents didn't show up for work. Okay, but we do have Aliyah even in the time of COVID. And regarding Sai Barikat, I really don't think that anybody was surprised that Israel accepted the Palestinian request to treat him. Can you really imagine Israel saying no? I really can't imagine. Of course we do. And we have a long history with Sai Barikat. You know very well, he's the #1 propaganda machine for the Palestinians, calling to boycott Israel and saying no in all the negotiations. Can anybody here imagine that we would say no and not treat him? Of course not. So,
Well,
Jews in Montreal and Jews in Israel are Jews.
All over the world.
Well, Israel has a history that Israel always treat the Arabs, and when they need a good treatment, they always go to Israel, regardless if they are enemy or they are not. And Israel never said no. So
even throughout the pandemic, we've been collaborating with the Palestinians. We have been providing them with the equipment for the testing and with protective gear. And in some severe cases, we allowed Palestinians inside Israel to be treated in Israeli hospitals. We provided training for Palestinian medical professionals. And we've been working very closely with the Palestinian Authority to prevent outbreaks of the pandemic. So, we're doing whatever we can, and even the United Nations Secretary General said Yashel Koach to Israel for their cooperation with the Palestinians on COVID. So for us to get a compliment from the Secretary General of the United Nations is not something that happens every day. So it's really an indication that it's a true, genuine effort from Israel to help our neighbors in the region facing COVID.
Well, this gives us a lot of pride that Israel take care of everybody. And it has always been like that. When the Arabs need a good treatment, they go to Israel. Even here, when they want a good doctor, they go to a Jewish doctor. And this is give us a lot of pride. Regardless the relations between us and the people. When it comes to medicine, we are always there to treat everybody equally.
Gladys, I used to work at a company where the head of the parts department, a very big guy, a Christian guy, he said, I will only go to a Jewish doctor and he has to be old.
Why? Why he has to be old?
Well, it's his way of saying he admires the wisdom that comes from Jewish doctors. It's just
By the way, I just want to comment. If any of you, chas v'chalila, have to go to an Israeli hospital, don't be surprised to find Arab doctor, Arab nurses, Arab orderly, Arab pharmacists. Okay,
they are Israeli.
They are Israelis,
Wow.
and they are very, very present in the Israeli medical system, from the top to the bottom. Okay.
Well,
So again, it goes back to the irony of Saeb Arikat, who calls Israel apartheid state, and now he's treated in an Israeli hospital in Jerusalem. And I can guarantee you that he is treated by Arabs.
I am not surprised by that. My father was treated by Arab in the hospital in Petah Tikva, Sharon, I think the name. His doctor was Muslim. And also my brother-in-law, 2 years ago, I was in Israel when he was in the hospital. The doctor was a young Arab and he spoke, his Hebrew was fluent, and everybody loves him. There is no difference. And the same thing here in the Jewish hospital. When my husband was in the hospital, there were also Arab guys, and they called him Ammu, like uncle. There was a guy, a doctor from Kuwait. He told him his family is from Iraq because we are from Iraq. And he was very close to him, and he was very warm to him, and he took care of it. My husband passed away, but this is not their fault. But we are used to that. I mean, for medicine, it shouldn't be any difference. And we are proud of Israel for giving the good example.
I have a question. Can I
Sorry,
ask?
just before that, I'll just answer something that was on the chat. For those of you who are planning to travel to Israel, so you have to, if you're not Israeli citizens, you have to apply to us. All the information is on our website. You have to apply to us, and we will guide you through the process. We don't decide here. We just prepare the documents for the application, and then we send it to Israel, where it's reviewed. And if it's approved, okay, then the Israel sends the permission, and the person from Canada can board the plane and go to Israel. So if you're an Israeli citizen, you do not need permission. You can buy a ticket and go to Israel. For now, Canada is considered a green country. So once you arrive to Israel, you are not required to quarantine. I hope this will stay the same. I strongly advise that if you're going to Israel, monitor this. So it doesn't change every day, but it could change. So theoretically, a country like Canada, if all of a sudden there's going to be a major change here in the pandemic, it could switch back to red. And that would mean that somebody coming from Canada would have to quarantine. But for now, I don't see it happening. I see another question in the chat of illegal migration from Sudan. This is a problem that is basically in the past, because already a few years ago, Israel completed the construction of a fence along the border with Egypt. I don't know if you know, but for decades, we didn't have a fence along the border with Egypt. Even so asylum seekers from Africa would walk, literally walk through the Sinai, and with the help of Bedouins, they would smuggle them through the border. And then when they would come to Israel, they would claim asylum. But this is no longer an issue because the border has been sealed. So we no longer see, we have to deal with those who are already inside. Okay, what are we going to do with them? Okay, they're not refugees, but they're not going to settle in Israel. Some of them move on to other countries, but some of them return home, depends where they're from. It's a very complicated issue, but the numbers are not growing. Nobody is coming in through Sinai anymore. Somebody wanted to ask a question.
Me? Yes, I'm the one who wanted to go to Israel in November for a wedding, but I do need your information. I don't know how to get it from the consulate. If you could guide me, please. This is question number one. I got a question from London. A gentleman was saying that there was an agreement that Lebanon should never have any missiles at all. And the fact they have at least 150,000 now is how come Israel hasn't addressed it with the United Nations? How come Israel hasn't talked about it? Okay, sorry. And I remember once, and for me, it stayed in my mind. I know I'm going to several subjects, but I want to put in my thoughts. I don't even know if it was you, but there was somebody a few years ago in Florida saying that the young American Jews are distancing themselves from Israel they are aligning themselves with the BDS, which is what universities are for these days. They are very leftist, and this is one of the leftist movement in the States. And that what those young people are doing is not only silly or stupid, but it's suicidal. And I try to tell it to every American who gets very angry at me. And this has been an issue that is bothering me a lot because it's scary.
Okay, so I think I'm going to try to address all these issues, and I believe that we will also, I don't know what is the time limit, but maybe we're approaching the end. So starting with BDS and the Jewish younger generation in North America. So of course, the connection between Israel and the Jewish diaspora in general, and the Jewish diaspora in North America specifically, it has a major importance for Israel. It's strategic importance for Israel. Okay, we're one family, we're one people. Okay, and Israel is your home. Okay, and it has to remain that way. And unfortunately, when these young Jews, many of them who don't grow up within the Jewish system, you know, they don't necessarily go to Jewish day school or to Jewish summer camp or have any interaction with the Jewish federations or communities where they live. They come to a college or to university, and then the first things they hear about Israel is the BDS propaganda. So the way to deal with it is, is by education and information, what Israel is all about, okay, how much we have in common when it comes to our liberal values, our true substantial democracy, and what we're doing when it comes to human rights and to Kun Olam, and just to show what Israel is all about. BDS is a form of anti-Semitism, okay? Because at the end of the day, if you discriminate the state of Israel and you don't apply the same standards as you do to other countries, then it's discrimination and it's anti-Semitism. And what's most important is that it's ridiculous that at the time when Arab countries have relations with Israel, Egypt, Jordan, Emirates, Bahrain, it's only a matter of time before other countries will join, maybe Sudan, maybe Oman. People are even talking about Saudi Arabia, okay? In a country where 20% of the population are Arab Muslim, okay? Even my colleagues, Israeli diplomats representing the state of Israel are Arabs, even ambassadors, even generals in the army. So the whole concept of BDS is based on false ideas, false presumptions. But you need to counter it by presenting it, by not shying away from revealing these facts. A little bit about Lebanon. We need to differentiate between Hezbollah and the state of Lebanon, or the Lebanese National Army. Okay, what happened basically in the last 4 decades is that Iran created a state within a state. Okay, they have Hezbollah, which is Iranian proxy. They get their funding, they get their training, they get their arms and weapons from Iran. They get their instructions from Tehran, not from Beirut. Okay, now at the end of the second war in Lebanon, in the summer of 2006, the United Nations Security Council had a resolution calling for the dismantling, okay, of Hezbollah. But nobody is enforcing this resolution, okay? We do have a peacekeeping force of the United Nations called UNIFIL, which is across the border in monitoring the situation. But this UNIFIL is completely teethless. They don't inspect inside the villages, and the Hezbollah is hiding the weapons inside the homes, inside residential areas. Whenever there is a violation, they don't inspect it, they don't investigate. So they're there, but they are not as effective as we would like them to be. But of course, we are always complaining to the United Nations about violations. I don't know if you remember, but we discovered 4 tunnels, not in Gaza, in Lebanon, Hezbollah under the border, which are clear violations. And I think that things are starting to change in Lebanon. They're starting to realize that the fact that they allow this state within a state to continue operating they're paying a very big price. We saw that in the explosion in Beirut. Of course, we cannot prove that Hezbollah was responsible for all this explosive material in the port. But then again, who else has an interest for such a long time to keep such a big stockpile of explosive material? And we know that there's also explosive material in, we have explosive material in homes in the south of Lebanon. Every now and then we see accidents happening in the south of Lebanon. We see there's an explosion. So we know that there's stockpiling in Lebanon. One of the indications that things are changing is that last week, for the first time in 30 years, Lebanese officials and Israeli officials met for the first time. The purpose of this meeting was to negotiate the maritime border. This is because Lebanon has a very, very high motivation now, with its economy destroyed completely, to use the gas reservoirs in the Eastern Mediterranean. They couldn't develop it so far when there was a dispute, and they couldn't negotiate with Israel because Hezbollah would not allow them. But now, with the Lebanese economy struggling, they have no option. So they are, of course, with US intervention and a lot of American diplomacy, after 3 years of really pushing, they managed to bring the parties to negotiate. And I don't think that Lebanon is the next country to have peace after Emirates or Bahrain, but this is definitely a positive indication that we are going to have a clear, hopefully, agreement on the maritime border, which will enable both Lebanon and Israel to explore the gas resources in that part of the Mediterranean. Again, going to your first question about about entering Israel. Please, we have a website. Okay, we have Facebook, Israel in Montreal, or in French, Israel à Montréal. Okay, please go into the website. Please go to Facebook. You will find instructions. At the end of the day, all you need to do is to call us or to send us an email, and we will get back to you, okay, and instruct you what kind of documents you need to bring, you need to send. Actually, everything is going to be by email. You don't have to come here, okay, for us to issue you a permit to go to Israel. Okay, our phone numbers are online, our email address is online. Call us, write us, okay? We will get back to you with instructions how to proceed. Many people are already doing it, believe me.
I would like to ask.
Yes.
I would like to ask, can you tell us something about the situation of gas in Israel? Is Israel rich in gas, in exporting it to Egypt and other countries? How rich Israel is with the gas?
Okay, so for 60 years, Israel was completely dependent on imports of energy sources. Okay, we had to import oil, we had to import coal. Almost all of our energy was from burning coal. And then in 2009, we discovered gas in the Mediterranean, in our territory, in our waters. This is a very dramatic change in Israeli economy and in Israeli energy sector, because within a very short time, we are switching from a country that is importing energy to a country that is exporting.
Exports, yeah.
And so this generates a lot of wealth, which has to be managed very carefully. Okay, first of all, how much taxes, the companies that are doing the exploration and the production, how much royalties they have to pay. On the one hand. On the other hand, what do you do with the revenues? Do you put it in your national budget, or do you put it in a long-term investment program, for future generations, so that it will not change dramatically the Israeli economy, like it happened in other countries that all of a sudden had a dramatic income and it completely destabilized their economy. It also has a security aspect in the region, because when we sell our gas to Egypt, or when we sell our gas to Jordan, okay, it creates a lot of interdependence in the region. Okay, there's more need for cooperation. In fact, there is now an Eastern Mediterranean energy alliance. It's Egypt and Israel and Jordan and the Palestinians all together, coordinating how to better use this resource. So this is a real game changer. Now, in addition to this, we're also switching to cleaner energy, because now we have gas. We have gas we can use to produce electricity in our power stations. So gradually we're reducing the coal and increasing gas, which is cleaner energy. But we're also changing the infrastructure so that, you know, major consumers of energy will get the gas directly. Okay, so instead of, you know, gas becoming electricity and then electricity to the factory will be connected directly to the gas, the grid. So really, these are things that are dramatically changing the Israeli economy, and also our cooperation with our neighbors.
I read that several times the way it was sent, the gas was sent to Egypt was damaged by terrorists. It was done that several times.
Yeah,
Is the route repaired? Is the gas still flowing to Egypt in spite of all the terrorist damage?
I think that that's a story in the past. I think they managed to put it behind, and now they're constructing underwater. They're designing the underwater pipe that would lead the gas directly to Europe through Cyprus and Greece and Italy. So,
wow, to Europe.
So, yeah, because Europe doesn't want to be dependent on Russian gas. They're looking for new sources of energy. So it's very, very attractive for them. And we're now working together on how to create this infrastructure of exporting gas directly to the European market. It's really dramatic changes.
This is a great thing. I never heard about it. Now you are revealing to us very important information. Thank you.
Sorry, Steve had a question. Steve Aker. He always asks interesting questions.
I think I saw in the chat Steve's questions about the Dead Sea.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. I think it was in the 70s, there was this very ambitious plan to dig an underground canal from the Mediterranean to the Dead Sea, so to refill it with water from the Mediterranean. But this plan was shut down. I don't think it was necessarily because of the economic cost. I think it was because they realized that certain minerals in the Mediterranean and certain minerals in the Dead Sea meet each other. It could have very catastrophic environmental effect. But there are very interesting things that are happening. For example, connecting the Red Sea to the Dead Sea. That means water from Eilat or Aqaba will flow on the pipe north, okay? And then this water would be desalinated, so the farmers can use it to water their fields. And then also some of the water would go to refill the lake, the Dead Sea, from the south. Another thing that we're very much optimistic is that we used to be dependent on the Kinneret for our drinking water. Everybody knows Hamuvil Ha'artzi, this mega infrastructure project of pumping water from the Kinneret all the way to the Galilee, and then it flows downhill and then in pipes all the way to the Negev. But in the last decade, Israel built an infrastructure of desalination plants along the Mediterranean. Again, this goes back to the energy. This is when you have abundance of energy, you can use that energy to desalinate salt water and create potable drinking water. So we reached a point where we practically no longer depend on rain, and we practically no longer depend on the Kinneret to have water. We don't need to pump water from the Kinneret anymore. We can even refill the Kinneret. They are now even redesigning the infrastructure so we can pump water in the other way into the Kinneret. And I hope that gradually, without pumping water from the Kinneret, and with this new source of water from the south, we will be able to rehabilitate the Dead Sea. It's not an easy process. It's a very complicated process, but I think we're on the right track.
Consul General, if I may, I read an article that they are contemplating making a pipeline going through Saudi Arabia to the Emirates from Israel. I mean, Saudi Arabia, it's very mountainous and all. Is there any chance of that happening?
Look,
A dream.
if you would ask me a year ago, I probably wouldn't be so optimistic, but today, why not? I mean, look,
You never know.
first of all, we have to remember that all the way back from the British mandate, we had oil pipelines going all the way from the oil's rich areas, you know, like Iraq, going all the way to Haifa port. And then the British built the port and they built the refineries. You know, everybody who's been to Haifa remembers the big refineries, and export the oil to Europe or to Britain. So the infrastructure existed already, you know, even before the creation of the State of Israel. Today, Saudi Arabia allows airplanes, Israeli airplanes, to fly freely above its airspace. So in the line of integration and cooperation in the region, I think it only makes sense that Emirati gas and Emirati oil will cross through Saudi Arabia and reach the ports of Israel in the Mediterranean. And we're already talking about Emirati containers coming to Eilat, and then using the pipeline we have from Eilat to Ashkelon, okay? So they won't have to go across Africa or around Africa to reach Europe. They can use the pipeline that we have from Eilat to Ashkelon.
First and then come.
And then the oil will go from Ashkelon to the markets in Europe. So we're already there.
You know, you pointed out that we have to really take seriously look at the geographic region of East Asia, like South Korea and the neighboring countries. Well, I think, like you said, we have to start to compete in a serious way. This alliance with in the Middle East now is a good start.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. You know, again, I don't think that Israel can transform into a manufacturing giant. Okay, Israel cannot compete with Korea, Japan, China, India, or Thailand for that matter.
Yeah.
Okay, we don't have sufficient human resources for that. But when it comes to innovation, when it comes to research, okay, we can become not only a regional power, but even a world leader. And we can become a regional hub, okay, for airplanes, for ships, okay, for finance, okay, with these new partnerships that are developing, okay, Israel can be a more important player in the world economy.
You know, it's been said already in the Bible that kings are going to come and pull at your skirt, Zion.
Mhm.
And they are coming now.
Mhm.
You know, from all over the world, they're asking Israel for help.
Well, you know, I have to tell you that in the world before COVID, okay, practically every day in the state of Israel, there is an official visit, either of a head of state or a minister.
Mm.
Okay, I'm talking about 400 official visits a year.
Yes,
Wow.
I heard about it.
These
Yeah.
ministers, they don't come to Israel to swim in Tel Aviv, and they don't come to, they want cooperation with Israel. They want security cooperation, they want intelligence cooperation, they want security technology, okay? And they want to tap into Israeli innovation, okay? Even economic giants like China, like Korea, like Canada, like US, okay? They are competing, they look for the competitive edge, they look for the added value. What can make them more efficient? What can make them safer? Not only in physical security, also in cyber security. Now that everybody is virtual, everything is going online, we are also more vulnerable because everything is done online. All the financial transactions, all our communication, okay? That makes us also more vulnerable. Israel is a world leader in cybersecurity. Okay, so these are things that Arab countries cannot ignore. You know, in the past, the monarch, the regime, they could prevent people from access to information. This is today, the information is available. You know, people know who is what, and they know that what Israel has to offer.
I'm just thanking God that the fact that Bibi Netanyahu, just before COVID, he was traveling to 6 continents and making so much friendships, you know. I think Israel's biggest economic asset is the idea of friendship, and that's what she's doing now.
Absolutely. It's economic cooperation, free markets, direct flights, you know, open exchange of ideas, and creating as many partnerships as possible. That's what we do here in Montreal. That's what my colleagues are doing all over the world. You don't see us in the news when we prepare these agreements and when we create all these collaborations, but gradually we see the fruits of our work.
You know, our dear Consul, one of the most precious takeaways that I have from our meeting today is I learned that some of Israel's diplomats, like ambassadors, are Arab Israelis.
Of course.
That's huge.
Yes, 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 yes. I invite you next time you can travel to Israel to come to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and walk the corridors, and you will see Israel in a miniature. You'll see people from the city center and people from the periphery. You will see men and women. You will see people with disabilities. You will see Christians and Muslims and Druze. Okay, you will see everybody. And when you go online and look at Embassy of Israel in this country and that country and look at the name of the diplomats, okay, you will see Arab names. Okay, my previous posting was in Seoul, Korea. Today, the lady who is in my position in Korea is an Arab Muslim woman.
Oh my God.
Bravo.
Okay, and it's all across the globe. We have Arabs. They are proud Israeli citizens representing their country. Okay, everybody is now talking about Azerbaijan and its conflict with Armenia. Ambassador of Israel to Azerbaijan is an Arab Christian. And I could go on. And this is also in the military and in the police and in the courts and the hospital. Okay, there's nothing, nothing to hide here. Israel is 20% Muslim, and they're an integral part of Israeli society all across the sectors. So I just want to address the last question I saw on the chat. So about the new regional power in the Middle East. So the main division in the Middle East is not Jews against Arabs. Okay, the main division in the Middle East is not the state of Israel against the Arab countries. Okay, it's not the main story, what's happening. It's not the main dynamic that's happening. Okay, the main division is between the radical political Islam, or the Islamism, or Islamists, okay, the reactionary fascist Islam, and the moderates. And the radical camp is led by Iran, okay, and the moderates are led by Saudi Arabia and Egypt. This is the main division in the Middle East. And the moderates are, as we can see, coming together.
Amazing.
Because they are facing this threat of Iran. Iran is trying to expand, it's trying to export the Islamic revolution. Okay, they are doing it in countries that are weak. They're doing it in Yemen, they're doing it in Lebanon and in Syria and in Iraq. Okay, that's how they're trying to destabilize these Arab countries and increase their influence. Okay, and the moderate Arab countries who are facing this danger, okay, they are joining forces with Israel to confront this danger. So this is a political, military,
we haven't talked about Turkey.
Turkey is a very interesting case because it's, first of all, this is not an Arab country.
Yeah.
Okay. We have to be very clear. The main powers in the Middle East are not Arab. Okay, it's Israel, it's Iran, and it's Turkey.
Yeah.
Arabs are not the main powers in the
Yeah.
definitely not military. Turkey is an economic player. It is a member of NATO. It is a very strong military. So historically, we have very, deep economic relations with Turkey, and we still do.
Mhm.
In fact, when countries like Syria and Iraq and Lebanon become less stable and less safe, then a large part of Turkish export goes through Israel and then to Jordan and then
Wow.
to countries in the Middle East. So we are a very important commercial trade economic partner for Turkey. Having said that, of course, it is ruled by an Islamist, okay,
Yeah.
who is trying to lead this radical Islamist Sunni world, not like Iran, which is trying to lead the Shia, but
Mm.
but the leader of Turkey is trying to establish Turkey as the leader of the Sunna, of the radical Sunna. So they are supporting Hamas. They are supporting, the Islamic the Brotherhood, and they are supporting all these radical, violent Sunni organizations, which are a very big problem not only for us, also for Saudi Arabia, for Emirates, for Bahrain, for Jordan, for Egypt. So it's a very clear what's the game in the region.
Thank you.
I had a last question.
Okay.
I had a last question. I'm very worried about the Biden-Harris combination. How does Israel feel, especially because all the young Jews are so vehemently with them, and these people have the Ilham Omars and Tlaibs and Sarsours, and I'm terrified of them. I come from Iraq. I've been through Saddam. I know the signs. I know the signs of anti-Semitism, and I'm seeing it start. And I am feeling that the American Jews are doing exactly what the German Jews did when they kept saying we are German first, and they are saying we're American. They think they're invulnerable. They don't realize it's going to escalate against them. And I don't know. I mean, my own nephew and niece, you talk to them and they resent you for even, they think we are archaic. And I don't know. I'm making enemies, out of people I love, because I am trying to have them see the light, and they can't. They just can't. So unless you've been through it, you don't know what it's like. The history is repeating itself. I'm terrified. Please tell me what's going to happen.
So I think I addressed this issue before, but I really don't think there's any room to be alarmed. Okay, we have a very long history with the United States. It's very wide, it's very deep, it's very stable, it's very institutionalized. It's like a very big ship that's going straight. It won't make major changes when the American people elect a Republican president or a Democratic president. The ship will stay the course. The strategic alliance between US and Israel will continue because it's also American interest, okay, regardless of who is in the White House. It's American interest to maintain this alliance. We are the US strongest ally in the region, and we have shared values with the US. So I don't think there's a reason to be alarmed. But of course, we need to keep engaging with young American Jews and to keep them inside the tent, so to speak. And to not be afraid to confront all this anti-Israel propaganda that they are absorbing by showing them how they are wrong, and by showing them what the true Israel. And that's the homework we have. And
It's not working.
well, then I have to try better. I have a feeling that we're about to run out of time. So I don't know if maybe Lisette or Gladys, you want to say some closing remarks?
Well,
Last question, or?
I have a question. If someone from Women Learning Group coming to Israel, do we have a special privilege?
I will deal with their request personally.
Oh my God.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Mr. Levy, my closing remark is I am, as we speak, getting ready to send an email. Can I address it to you? I have to go in November for a wedding of a girl I coached to get married. So I have to go.
Again, I have to make it very clear. There are very specific guidelines who can, who cannot. Okay, it's not just, you know, if you're not an immediate relative of the person who's getting married, I doubt if you will get an approval. Okay, and please try to understand, we are going through a second wave of COVID, and most of the COVID cases in Israel came from North America. So there's a reason why there are limitations on who is getting this. Now, go ahead and send the email. We will, but I urge you to lower your level of expectations, because, you know, we're not out of the woods yet.
But if I take a COVID test before going, so doesn't help, huh?
No.
Okay, I'll try. Thank you.
Is there a time for another question?
So,
I would like to thank from all my heart, David Levy, with your beautiful speech that you gave us. You answered so many questions of us that we had in our mind. We read every day about Israel, but there is nothing like to see you and you speak to us directly and you explain everything to us. We learn so much from you, and we are always happy to see you. And we cannot wait to see you for the third time.
Mm-hmm.
You became like one of us, one of the family, and we all love you, and we all look forward to meet you again and again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I want to remind you all, okay, that until you go to Israel, you can read an Israeli book, you can see an Israeli movie. There's lots of Israeli TV shows that are very good. I strongly recommend. You can follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Instagram.
Consul,
informed.
I want to donate 250 books of my father. You have a copy of it. I have a whole inventory. I ordered it before COVID, but now I can't go anywhere. So I thought the whole idea is for this to be read and inspire the young. So is there a way I can donate these, that you can send them to Israel and I'll be sure it gets into the hands of schools? Or, I mean, Sami Surani, our history scholar, he said that it's a timeless book and that I should talk to you.
Sure. Please send me an email.
I will. Thank you.
I would like to know if our president, Edmond Elbaz, is still here. And if you would like to say a few, hello, Edmond. Would you like to say a few words to our consul? You are welcome. Well, Baruch haba. Well, it has to be unmuted.
Unmute yourself,
It has
Edmond.
to be unmuted.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, we hear you. We are all for you.
Well, dear Consul General David Levy, it's amazing to listen to you. Your presentation was an overview, a beautiful overview of what's going on in Israel now. And as you could see, we are all very, very deeply attached to whatever happens to Israel today and to its neighbors around it. You answered all the questions with passion, with clarity, and personally, I could have continued to listen to you for another hour. You brought us so much light, so much knowledge about Israel. And more so, you brought us a little bit of Israel here in our isolation during this pandemic. And to bring us Israel right here to our homes in our isolation is a blessing. So all what we could say is, and pray for Chadesh Yemenu Kekedem. May our days be renewed like in the past. So, Consul General, dear Mr. Levy, Toda Rabba for coming to meet us today, and Yashar Koach, and Kol HaKavod, and continue Michael El Chayil to provide us with your inspiration and the best news from Israel. Toda Rabba.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you so much. Our President, Edmond Elbaz, the very beloved president of the Spanish and Portuguese Synagogue in Montreal. Thank you very much, Edmond. Thank you.
Gladys.
Meeting today, if we were together, is the beautiful buffet of food that Gladys always prepares for us after all.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Be well and be safe.
Thank you, Edmond. You are a great supporter of all the good things that we do. You encourage us, you inspire us, and you make us always stronger and stronger. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Have a good day and be safe, all of you.